The ashlands stretched endlessly, a barren wasteland of jagged rocks, blackened soil, and smoke that rose like dark fingers into the sky. The air was thick with ash and the ground burned faintly beneath boots. Most people avoided this place, calling it cursed. But Dorian Vale moved carefully among the ruins, scanning the cracked earth for anything worth salvaging. His pack was light, but his eyes were sharp. Every shadow could hide danger, hostile scavengers, toxic vents, or worse. He paused when a faint sound caught his attention, a soft, trembling whine, almost drowned by the wind. He crouched behind a jagged boulder, peering through the haze. At first he saw nothing. Then a flicker of fire-colored scales, barely visible, moved across the scorched ground. A small creature, no bigger than a child, struggled to drag itself across the stones. Dorian's heart tightened. The hatchling was alone, its wings crumpled, ribs showing beneath thin, glowing skin. Its tiny eyes, amber and wide with fear, locked on him, and for a moment neither moved. Hunger and exhaustion etched every line of its fragile body. The ashlands were not forgiving, and survival here meant strength. Yet somehow this tiny creature had lived this long. Dorian's hand hovered over the pack. He had little to spare, but he dug out a small ration bar, breaking it into pieces and tossing them gently forward. The hatchling flinched, snarling weakly, its tiny claws scraping the ash. Hunger won over fear. It shuffled toward the food, sniffed it, and hesitated before nibbling. Dorian allowed a quiet breath of relief. "Easy," he whispered. "You won't be hurt." He crouched lower, careful not to make sudden movements. The hatchling hunched back, wings quivering, but it didn't flee. Its breathing was ragged, shallow, as if every inhale was a battle. Dorian realized how dangerous the ashlands truly were. One wrong step could mean death for either of them. And yet, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: responsibility. Protecting this creature was more than mercy. It was a choice that could change both their lives. Night approached fast. The pale sun slipped behind clouds of ash and temperatures plummeted. Dorian searched the area for shelter, but the ruins offered little. He grabbed fragments of scorched metal, bending them to form a makeshift wall, and laid down tattered cloth for warmth. The hatchling crawled closer, curling against his chest. Its small body shivered, but the warmth of human skin steadied it. "I'll call you Ember," he said softly, brushing a hand over the faintly glowing scales. Ember blinked, almost like he understood. It was a fragile bond, but enough to begin. Dorian knew scavenging alone was dangerous. Raiders often roamed the ashlands, hunting anyone brave, or foolish, enough to enter. He had seen the remnants of their attacks: shattered shelters, scorched bodies, and looted ruins. Protecting Ember would require more than food. He would need cunning, traps, and careful planning. He studied the perimeter, noting shadows and movement in the distance, every instinct screaming caution. The hatchling whimpered again, and Dorian realized it was far too weak to fly or defend itself. Ember's eyes held a mix of fear and trust, fragile but present. The realization hit him. This wasn't just a scavenger's problem. This was life or death for both of them. As darkness fell, the wind shifted, carrying an unfamiliar scent. Dorian froze. Raiders. He could hear the faint crunch of boots on rock, the soft clinking of weapons. Ember stirred against his chest, sensing danger. Dorian pressed a finger to his lips, signaling stillness. Heart pounding, he scanned the horizon, searching for higher ground. He whispered a plan to himself, quick and precise. Use the ruins, make traps from the debris by time. He couldn't outrun them forever, but he could make sure Ember had a chance. The hatchling's glowing eyes followed him, wide and alert, trusting his every move. A shadow moved closer, a human figure, but its intentions were unclear. Dorian tensed, ready to defend. Ember hissed, a tiny, desperate sound that mirrored Dorian's own fear. The air grew heavy, thick with anticipation. Every step could mean attack or retreat. Dorian inhaled sharply. He had faced impossible odds before: space storms, collapsed starships, marauders, but never like this. Never with a creature depending entirely on him. Yet he knew one thing: he would not let Ember die. Not here, not in the ashlands. The figure drew nearer, and Dorian's mind raced. Improvised defenses, the hatchling's survival, escape routes, every detail mattered. Ember's wings twitched, almost as if he felt Dorian's determination, drawing strength from it. A sudden flash of movement in the shadows. A warning or the beginning of a confrontation. Dorian's jaw tightened. The night had just begun, and survival in the ashlands was about to get a lot harder. And somewhere deep in the darkness, Ember's soft, glowing pulse flickered in sync with Dorian's heartbeat, both of them bracing for what was coming. Dorian crouched behind a jagged outcrop, eyes narrowing against the drifting ash. The human figure he had spotted earlier was gone, but the scent remained: footsteps, metal, faint sweat. Raiders. They didn't just wander the ashlands. They hunted anyone weak, anyone alone. And now he and Ember were exactly that. He shifted Ember slightly, careful not to startle the hatchling. Its wings were still too small to carry it far, but its eyes followed him, alert and trembling. Hunger gnawed at Ember, yet fear kept it frozen. Dorian pressed a finger to his lips. "We have to move," he whispered. "Stay close, Ember. Trust me." The first challenge was getting to a safer area without drawing attention. Dorian scanned the terrain, noting collapsed tunnels and jagged rocks that could hide both him and the hatchling. He had to use every scrap of engineering knowledge, every instinct honed from years salvaging derelict starships. One misstep and the raiders would strike before he could react. He began improvising traps along the narrow paths, simple but deadly. Sharp metal shards embedded in ash, tripwires rigged to create loud noises and draw attention away from their real escape route. He moved quickly, hands steady despite the adrenaline pulsing through his veins. Ember mimicked his movements as best it could, crouching low and skittering after him. A sudden hiss froze Dorian mid-step. Ember's small body stiffened, tail curling in warning. Something had moved in the shadows. A pack of scavenger drones left behind from old conflicts but still active. They were small, fast, and aggressive, with sensors that could detect heat signatures and movement. Dorian's mind raced. Improvised flamethrower or distraction. The drones could crush Ember in seconds. He grabbed a scrap canister from his pack and lit a small incendiary, tossing it toward the nearest drone. The flame burst, startling the machines but not enough. They adjusted quickly, sensors glowing, locking onto Ember. Dorian dove, scooping the hatchling into his arms as he rolled to safety behind a boulder. Ember hissed, flames licking at his tiny scales as he writhed against Dorian's chest. "Stay still. Trust me," Dorian shouted, heart pounding. He activated a makeshift EMP pulse from salvaged circuits. The drones shuddered, sparks flying, and toppled in a clatter of metal limbs. Ember blinked at the flashing lights, stunned but unharmed. Dorian exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of both fear and relief. They pressed on, moving deeper into the ruins. Hunger gnawed at them both. Ember's small stomach could not hold much, and Dorian had rationed his last protein bars in part 1. He spotted molten fungi clinging to the scorched walls, nutrient-rich, barely enough for the hatchling. He tore pieces carefully, offering them to Ember. The hatchling's jaws worked eagerly, and Dorian allowed himself a brief smile. Even in this wasteland, life persisted. Hours later, the sound of footsteps echoed again, heavier, closer, organized. Raiders. They had tracked him, no doubt alerted by the failed drones. Dorian scanned for cover, knowing that a direct fight would be suicide. Ember stirred against his chest, instinctively sensing the danger. Dorian whispered a plan. They would lead the raiders into a collapsed tunnel network he had noted earlier, creating bottlenecks and choke points where numbers meant less. As they ran, he improvised signals for Ember. A flick of the wrist, a tap on his leg, small gestures teaching the hatchling to dodge, hide, and follow. Ember's instincts were sharp but untrained. Yet, with each step, it grew bolder, following his lead without hesitation. Dorian marveled at the creature's resilience. An orphan in a dead world, yet alive, learning, trusting. The first wave of raiders appeared at the canyon entrance. Dorian darted into a narrow crevice, dragging Ember low. The raiders shouted, but their weapons jammed against the tight walls. He rigged falling rocks from the ledges above, using gravity to his advantage. Ember watched, wings twitching, understanding instinctively. When the rocks tumbled, the raiders stumbled, scrambling to avoid injury. Dorian didn't pause. Every second counted. He led Ember through twisting passages, past heat vents that hissed like serpents, past jagged glass-like formations that could slice a careless foot. One wrong move, one careless glance, and either of them could die. His mind raced, calculating every trap, every step, every chance to survive. Night fell completely, black and choking with ash. Dorian finally found a hollowed-out chamber, deep enough to hide and rest for a few hours. Ember crawled into a corner, exhausted, small flames flickering weakly along his scales. Dorian knelt beside him, pressing a hand to Ember's side. "We're not safe yet," he whispered. "But we'll make it. We have to." As he checked the perimeter, a shadow flickered outside, a figure watching them. Raiders? Or another scavenger drawn to the glow of Ember's scales? Dorian's jaw tightened. Every choice now was critical. One wrong move and Ember's life could be over. He whispered to the hatchling, "Rest for now, Ember. Tomorrow we fight smarter. We survive." Ember curled closer, trusting him fully, even as the danger lingered just beyond the hollow walls. And as the wind howled outside, carrying distant metallic clanks and voices, Dorian realized the Ashlands had only begun testing him, and that Ember's survival depended entirely on his courage, ingenuity, and determination. The first light of ash-gray dawn barely touched the jagged edges of the Ashlands, yet Dorian was already awake. Ember lay curled at his side, eyes flickering weakly, still too small and fragile to venture far. Hunger gnawed at both of them. Scavenged protein bars had been consumed, and molten fungi from the previous day was gone. If they didn't find proper food soon, Ember wouldn't survive long enough to grow strong. Dorian surveyed the ruins ahead, remembering maps etched into his mind from old starship schematics he had studied years ago. Among the collapsed towers and ash-choked streets lay a biotech lab, abandoned after the planetary war. It could hold exactly what they needed: nutrient synthesizers, water purifiers, and maybe even medical supplies. But it wasn't a simple walk. The ruins were riddled with chemical vents, unstable floors, and dormant defense drones. Every step could trigger disaster. He nudged Ember gently. "Time to move, little one. Stick close." Ember's wings twitched. Its tiny claws scraped against ash as it followed, trusting Dorian completely. That trust was fragile, but it carried weight heavier than any weapon. Dorian knew he couldn't fail, not with Ember depending entirely on him. As they approached the first stretch of the lab ruins, a faint hiss echoed from the walls. Dorian froze. He scanned the ground and spotted thin lines of exposed wiring, remnants of old security grids. A single step could set off sparks or worse. He bent low, using a broken panel as a makeshift shield, and instructed Ember to crouch beside him. The hatchling obeyed instinctively, the glow in its eyes flickering nervously. Dorian muttered under his breath, calculating. He needed a diversion. He ripped a piece of scrap metal, set it against a pressure plate, and nudged it with a stone. Sparks erupted harmlessly, drawing attention from the pressure plate sensors. One by one the drone's alert lights blinked, then went dim, confused by the false signal. Ember's small hiss of relief mirrored Dorian's own silent triumph. They moved slowly, every step deliberate. When the floor gave way beneath Dorian's foot, he barely caught Ember in his free arm, gripping him tightly against his chest as he balanced on jagged concrete. Ember clung desperately, wings flaring slightly, eyes wide. "Almost there," Dorian whispered. "We can do this." Inside the main lab the air was stale, chemical vapors curling like smoke. Shelves of dusty vials and long-dead equipment lined the walls. Dorian's eyes fell on a nutrient synthesizer, intact though coated in ash. It required power, but he had salvaged a battery pack from the ruins yesterday. His hands worked quickly, connecting wires, recalibrating circuits. Sparks flew and the smell of ozone filled the air. Ember watched, fascinated, its tiny claws tapping in rhythm with Dorian's movements. Then the synthesizer hummed to life. Warm lights glowed. Nutrient paste extruded slowly into a shallow tray. Ember's amber eyes widened. Hunger overcame fear, and the hatchling lapped at the paste eagerly. Dorian smiled, exhausted but triumphant. "There you go," he said softly. "It. Grow strong." They didn't have time to relax. A distant rumble echoed from the ruins, footsteps heavy and deliberate. Raiders. Likely tracking the glow of Ember's scales from last night. Dorian's jaw tightened. They needed a strategy fast. The lab offered narrow corridors, perfect for defensive advantage. He began erecting improvised barricades from fallen shelving and shattered consoles, creating choke points where they could control the attacker's movement. Ember's wings twitched as Dorian worked. The hatchling had begun following subtle commands. Move left, duck, stay low. Dorian marveled at the creature's rapid learning. Its instincts were sharp, but its intelligence was growing fast. By teaching Ember to anticipate danger, he was not just protecting the hatchling, he was building a partner, a companion who could survive the Ashlands. As the footsteps drew closer, Dorian grabbed a small canister of volatile fuel from the synthesizer's storage. He rigged it as a trap. Tripwire, flick switch, and a brief flash and wall of heat would stop intruders long enough for them to escape deeper into the lab. Ember pressed close against his side, watching with wide, glowing eyes. "Ready?" he whispered. Ember's small hiss sounded like agreement. The first raider entered. The flash ignited, sending the intruder flying backward with a scream. Dorian moved quickly, dragging Ember through a side corridor. Another trap triggered, collapsing a portion of ceiling onto the next wave of attackers. Each step was carefully calculated, Dorian's mind racing faster than any predator, improvising, adapting, surviving. By nightfall they had cleared a safe chamber within the lab. Ember's glowing body radiated faint heat, curling up against Dorian. The synthesizer hummed steadily, providing a steady source of food. Exhaustion weighed on Dorian's muscles, but he allowed a quiet moment to breathe. The hatchling nuzzled his chest, warmth and trust flowing both ways. Yet outside the Ashlands remained merciless. The faint echoes of raiders' search parties drifted through the ruins. Every step forward meant risk, but Dorian's ingenuity had bought them time, a small victory in an unforgiving world. He pressed a hand against Ember's tiny wing. "We did it today," he whispered. "Tomorrow we'll push further." And deep in the shadows beyond the lab walls, movement stirred. New dangers lurked, ones neither human nor hatchling had faced. Dorian's jaw tightened. The Ashlands had only begun testing them, and Ember's survival still depended entirely on his courage, intelligence, and relentless determination. The night air of the Ashlands was thick with ash and anticipation. Dorian perched atop a collapsed tower, surveying the canyon below. The raiders had returned, larger this time, a battalion armed with scavenged energy rifles and flamethrowers. Their shouts echoed off jagged rock walls, hungry for Ember, hungry for control. Most humans would have fled. Most would have surrendered. Dorian tightened his jaw. He was not most humans. Ember stirred beside him, wings twitching nervously. The hatchling had grown stronger, but the scale of the threat dwarfed even its courage. Dorian whispered low, "Stay calm. Watch my lead. We fight smart, not fast." Ember's glowing amber eyes met his, a tiny spark of trust shining through fear. The battalion advanced, unaware of the traps Dorian had prepared during the day. He had rigged the canyon with collapsing rock formations, tripwires connected to makeshift explosive charges, and debris barricades designed to channel the raiders into narrow choke points. It was dangerous, but survival demanded risk. When the first wave entered the canyon, Dorian triggered a rock slide. Huge boulders thundered down, blocking the path and crushing several raiders. Screams echoed, but Dorian knew he had only bought moments, not victory. He pressed a hand to Ember's side, guiding the hatchling to the edge of the cliff. "Your turn," he whispered. Ember's wings stretched, tiny flames flickering along his scales. Ember dove from the cliff, targeting the lead raider. He released a controlled burst of fire, scorching the ground and forcing the humans to scatter. Dorian ducked behind a metal barricade, firing an improvised pulse cannon made from scavenged circuits and fuel canisters. Sparks erupted as several raiders were knocked off their feet. The canyon became chaos, a blend of human ingenuity and dragon instinct, perfectly synchronized. One raider, larger than the rest and armored in scavenged metal plating, managed to bypass a trap. He raised his weapon toward Dorian. Time slowed. Dorian rolled behind debris, grabbing a fragment of molten rock from the canyon floor. He flung it with all his strength. It struck the raider squarely in the chest, knocking him off balance and sending his weapon skidding across the ash. Ember lunged immediately, claws and teeth finding weak points in the armor. The raider fell with a thud, the others frozen in shock. Dorian knew the fight wasn't over. More raiders poured into the canyon, realizing their numbers were insufficient against the traps and Ember's aerial assaults. But he had prepared for this too. Using the canyon's natural layout, he funneled the attackers into narrow passageways where one at a time they could be dealt with. Every move required split-second calculation, each step dictated by both logic and courage. Ember followed perfectly, diving, slashing, and retreating on Dorian's signal. Hours passed, each moment stretching like a lifetime. Ash rained from collapsed rocks, flames flickered against the night, and the roar of Ember echoed through the canyon. Dorian's muscles burned, his hands blistered from handling improvised weapons, but he never faltered. Every fallen raider was a testament to human ingenuity, every trap a product of careful thought and quick adaptation. Then the largest threat appeared, the raider commander. Towering and brutal, he carried a reinforced energy cannon, designed to crush both human and dragon alike. He strode through the canyon like a walking wall, his eyes scanning for Dorian. Dorian's mind raced. One wrong move and both he and Ember could die here. He whispered to Ember, "Ready for the final act?" The hatchling hissed, wings flickering bright with heat, flames licking the air. Dorian lured the commander toward the narrowest passage, a collapsed ceiling directly above. He ducked behind debris as the commander raised the cannon. With precise timing, Dorian triggered a tripwire, collapsing tons of rock onto the path. Ember leapt in synchronization, fire blasting forward, forcing the commander to stumble into the trap. The canyon echoed with crushing stone and human triumph. When the dust settled, the battalion was gone. Silence replaced chaos, broken only by Ember's soft hissing and Dorian's ragged breathing. Both were battered, exhausted but alive. Ember nuzzled against Dorian's chest, flames flickering softly as if to say, "We survived." Dorian looked over the canyon. The ruins were littered with the aftermath of the battle, but the Ashlands had not claimed them. Human courage, strategy, and determination had turned the hunters into the hunted. He felt a surge of pride, not for the destruction but for survival, for protecting Ember, for turning despair into hope. Yet Dorian knew this victory was only temporary. The Ashlands were vast and the raiders were relentless. But for the first time he had proven something vital. Humans could overcome impossible odds even against overwhelming numbers. With Ember at his side, they were no longer prey, they were a force. As dawn crept over the horizon, casting pale light across the canyon, Dorian knelt beside Ember. The hatchling's small head rested against his shoulder, wings flaring weakly. "We'll need shelter, supplies and training," Dorian said softly. "And we'll get it. Together." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying distant sounds of scavenger activity. The Ashlands were far from done testing them. But Dorian's jaw tightened. No matter what came next, he would meet it with courage, intelligence, and relentless determination. Ember's survival, and perhaps the survival of many more, depended on it. And somewhere beyond the canyon, hidden among the ruins, new dangers stirred. The siege had ended, but the Ashlands had only begun challenging them. Dorian sat atop a jagged ridge, the pale light of dawn cutting through the ash-streaked sky. Ember lay curled at his side, wings stretched weakly but glowing faintly with heat. The battle against the raiders had ended, but the Ashlands were far from tamed. Yet for the first time in years, Dorian felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. He had not just endured, he had built hope from ruin. The lab had become their sanctuary. Dorian had repaired the nutrient synthesizer, salvaged water filters, and reinforced the walls with scavenged metal and stone. Ember thrived on proper sustenance, growing stronger each day, its small body radiating warmth and life. But the hatchling's survival was only the beginning. Dorian knew the Ashlands were home to countless orphan creatures, abandoned by the chaos of war and greed. And if one human and one dragon could survive, perhaps they could protect others too. Dorian's hands ached as he worked, assembling improvised enclosures for creatures that could not fend for themselves. Ember followed, observing and learning. Each flap of his wings, each hiss and flicker of flame, was coordinated with Dorian's instructions. The bond between human and dragon had evolved into partnership, a perfect blend of instinct and intelligence. Dorian marveled at Ember's adaptability. He realized that courage alone was not enough. Ingenuity, planning, and compassion were equally vital. Scouts from nearby human settlements began to take notice. Rumors spread of a human who had survived the Ashlands and tamed a dragon hatchling. Dorian welcomed them cautiously, sharing only what was necessary. Many were desperate, weary from loss, and afraid of venturing into the wasteland. But seeing Ember, seeing the traps and fortifications that had survived the raiders' assault, they felt hope. If one human could achieve this, perhaps they could too. The first challenge came when a wounded creature, a small fire-scaled drake, stumbled into the lab. Ember hissed protectively, flames flickering nervously. Dorian knelt beside it, assessing its injuries. Broken wing, shallow burns, and fear in its eyes. He worked quickly, using salvaged medical supplies to bind the wing, clean burns, and administer nutrient paste. Ember stayed close, offering warmth and reassurance. By nightfall, the drake was resting, alive and stable. Dorian allowed himself a brief smile. One life saved was proof that courage and compassion could defy even the harshest odds. Word continued to spread. Survivors from distant settlements began bringing orphan creatures to Dorian and Ember, seeking refuge. Together, they turned the lab into a hub of survival and hope. Dorian trained the newcomers, teaching them to build traps, forage safely, and navigate the deadly Ashlands. Ember became a teacher as well, demonstrating flight, fire control, and instinctive defense techniques. The unlikely pair, human and dragon, were creating a legacy. Yet the Ashlands were unforgiving. One evening, distant roars echoed across the horizon, predators larger than Ember, drawn by the scent of life. The lab's defenses would be tested again. Dorian's hands ached from repairs and planning, but he did not falter. He called Ember close. We can't run, he said. We prepare. We fight smart, together. Ember's small head pressed against his chest, eyes reflecting trust, courage, and determination. When the predators attacked, Dorian's ingenuity shone. He used the terrain to channel them into narrow passages, triggered traps to immobilize the largest, and coordinated with Ember to drive the smaller threats away. Every maneuver relied on experience, strategy, and split-second decisions. The predators were powerful, but human intelligence, combined with Ember's instincts, proved superior. By nightfall, the Ashlands were quiet once more. Exhausted, Dorian leaned back against a rock, watching Ember take flight over the lab, wings glowing softly against the crimson sky. The hatchling circled, dipping and twisting, mastering control and confidence. It was a sight that warmed Dorian's heart. Life, courage, and intelligence thriving in a place designed to destroy them. The following morning, Dorian called the newcomers together. "This isn't just about surviving," he said. "It's about building something better. One life saved, one creature protected, one plan executed at a time. That is what humans can do. That is what courage means." Ember landed beside him, wings folding, eyes bright and alert. The gathered humans and creatures looked to him as proof that hope could exist even in the Ashlands. Months passed and the sanctuary grew. Orphans thrived, survivors learned to navigate the wasteland, and Dorian became a symbol, a testament to human determination and ingenuity. News spread beyond the Ashlands. Humans who refused to bow to despair, who faced impossible odds with brains, heart, and courage. The Ashlands, once a place of fear and death, had become a beacon of survival and resilience. One evening, Dorian and Ember stood atop the highest ridge, surveying the land. Fires flickered in distant settlements, creatures roamed safely, and humans moved with purpose and pride. Ember nuzzled Dorian's shoulder, wings flaring briefly as if to say, "We did it." Dorian whispered softly, "We did it together. And we'll keep doing it." The Ashlands remained wild, dangerous, and unpredictable, but one human and one dragon had proven that courage, intelligence, and determination could overcome impossible odds. And in the hearts of every survivor, every creature protected, the legacy of their actions would live on forever. From the depths of desolation, Dorian and Ember had built hope. The Ashlands had tested them, and they had endured. Humanity, ingenuity, and courage had triumphed. And their story, whispered among humans and creatures alike, would inspire generations yet to come.